This is TWiT. We just got an update from Stacey Higginbotham, who brought us this breaking news. Google has been fined, we knew this, by the French regulator for privacy, CNIL, as Jeff says, CNIL, $50 million for violating GDPR. Stacey says Google has announced it's going to fight.
I can pull up a story for you.
50 million euros, which is about $57 million. Now, actually, if I read this properly, CNIL explained Google had violated two provisions of the law. This is according to Ars Technica. First, by not making its data collection policies easily accessible enough. They didn't contend that the policies weren't available to end users. It's just that there were too many different places. It was too difficult to find. And then second, by not obtaining sufficient and specific user consent for ad personalization, CNIL said it has to be every single place you're doing it. You can't just say, in general, do you mind if we collect data about you for personalizing ads? You have to say it at YouTube. You have to say it at Google Maps. You have to say it in Hangouts. You have to say it every single service.
Irritating as hell. Plus, so that's only because Google is more split up than other things. But sure, should the New York Times, should the Le Monde have to ask your permission in the food section and the book section,
right,
and the news section and the sports section? It's basically equivalent.
Well, it isn't though, because that all comes in a package called a newspaper.
Not anymore. It doesn't.
What?
Online?
Online.
But online you still have
a site. Yeah.
You go to the same site. And Google doesn't, I mean, Maps is owned by Google, and Android maybe not, but all the other Google properties, you are aware that they're owned by Google.
Google changed this, remember. We talked a lot about it a couple of years ago when Google unified their privacy policy across the board for all of its services. YouTube was the big one that hadn't for a long time, that really run separately. They incorporated all of it together. And obviously, from Google's point of view, it makes sense to aggregate a bunch. This happens a lot in media, where you'll aggregate a bunch of different kinds of platforms or media or into one thing because it's easier to sell that big thing and then spread it out. Now, who is Max Schrems? Because this complaint... He
is an Austrian who has been the thorn in the side of all the platforms, especially Facebook, but also Google, where he's done... projects, stunts, where he shows how much the platforms follow him, or he showed how his phone followed him everywhere, and so he's a provocateur, and he ends up then filing suits on behalf of all Europe against the various platforms.
So he says in this article by ours, following the introduction of GDPR, we have found that large corporations such as Google simply interpret the law differently and have only superficially adopted their products. It is important the authorities make it clear that simply claiming to be compliant is not enough. He runs an organization called NOYB.eu, not your business, or none of your business.eu. He's also complained against Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook. Those are all pending. So I think there is room for appeal here, because they're not saying Google doesn't tell people. They're just saying they don't make it easily
Which would think that there'd be a step. I don't know what happened, what CNIL did. There's two questions. Was there a step here where CNIL said, guys, you're not doing this right, and then there was a chance to remedy? And then second,
that's what the GDPR is. They passed a law, and the next step once you pass a law is to start enforcing the law. So that's the answer to your first question. So this is the act of enforcement. And then second.
But is it not the first time somebody's been fined under GDPR, or no?
No, there have been some smaller fines in different countries.
One of the questions we had last year when GDPR became law, and one of the things a lot of people said is, well, let's wait and see how they enforce it.
Yeah, because they were very quiet. They were very quiet about how they were going to enforce it. And different data protection agencies have different... They are each able to enforce it, right?
Well, that was my next question, Stacey.
And none of them, prior to actually the law being passed, none of them gave any indication of how they were going to do this. So what's happening here is, this is how the law works. You pass a law, and then you're like, and Google.
Well, but sometimes,
Google
Stacey,
and Facebook knew that they were going to be the target.
Sometimes, and I think GDPR had this. Isn't there kind of this process where under the law you're warned, offered an opportunity to remediate? Then if you don't, then
that's the safe harbor stuff around copyright.
Yeah, I don't think that's GDPR. Has that.
But Stacey, my real question is this: so the French are fining Google. Can the Germans and the Norwegians and the Dutch also fine Google under the same law? I thought it was EU was now under one.
I don't know. So every country has their own group that monitors this. So I don't. Yeah, I don't know if you can be fined multiple times. That is an excellent question that you would have to ask a lawyer. But would you like Google's statement?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Here is what a Google spokesperson said in a statement. We've worked hard to create a GDPR consent process for personalized ads that is as transparent and straightforward as possible, based on a regulatory guidance and user experience testing. We're also concerned about the impact of this ruling on publishers, original content creators, and tech companies in Europe and beyond. Dun, dun, dun.
And we should point out that this is not the full extent of the fine. They could have levied a fine up to 4% of the global revenue.
2%,
yes.
I thought of global.
4%. It's 4%.
Which would have been $4 billion. This $50 million is, frankly, Google could easily pay it. I think this is appealing it is on principle.
And they should. I mean, this is how we figure these things out. I mean, this regulation hasn't been tested in court. I think one could argue that a $57 million fine is either, tied to how badly the French regulators feel that Google has screwed up. So maybe they're like, this isn't a huge thing, but it's kind of a thing, Google. So let's get this fixed. So there's a lot of different ways you could interpret this.
So here's the question, and this isn't a legal question, but I think it speaks to the issue. Does why doesn't Google make it clearer? Why don't they just say, okay, fine, we'll put a pop-up everywhere? Why don't they make it clearer? And do people really not know what's going on? Do they need to make it clearer? Is Google not doing a good job? Completely independent of the law.
Information. I think it's really hard. So I was actually talking to a company just before I did this show about how they could improve their security, how they could improve communications around their data collection and security practices. And the solution I came up with is actually doing some sort of interactive quiz and incenting people to take it to get what is actually informed consent, right? And I think it's just so overwhelming to contemplate these things. We don't have a language for plain language for a lot of these issues, right? And every company is worried, or many companies are worried about the risk of scaring people if they actually explain kind of some of the risks and things, because people will read the worst into it. So there's like a business fear here. It's really hard to get informed consent over something as complicated as how someone like Google might use your data from different services. And then 3, readers or users aren't actually going to click through it. So I think that's why that's a real issue that we just have to solve, and no one's sure how.